One of the most powerful things in the entertainment industry, from what I see, are often the longer-running IPs. So why not talk about them today? You see, brands like Mario, Final Fantasy, and Shin Megami Tensei all have stood a true test of time for good reason. They have a very strong and wide appeal, and are very profitable, or are even popularized genres. But that's not really why I'm mentioning them. I'm here to talk about what happens when said franchises have to go through some change.
Yeah. Big change.
Especially with none of the original creators and with completely new staff. This is something that the examples I mentioned today have had to experience at least once or twice, maybe way more than you think. Things like this are just bound to happen when an IP is decades old. The original minds are either too busy, just don't want to continue working on it, or some other reason. So what do you do as a publisher if that IP is still super profitable? Pass the work on for new people to make something of it. I like to see this course of action as a massive double-edged sword. On one hand, you have someone else able to continue on said series and possibly make something as good, if not better, than what the IP used to offer. But on the other, this is a recipe for disaster if certain factors are taken into account and, worst case scenario, kill said franchise. Fun fact, if you couldn't tell, this entire section of the production was edited by someone else. This was just to demonstrate how drastic of a difference in outcome decisions like this have to the final product. Link to who it is will be down below. As I was saying though, there's miracles that break the odds. Not only does a completely new set of people give their own take to the franchise and succeed at the execution, it also becomes a fan-favorite entry with heavy amounts of potential and demand to further expand on what they made. And that brings me to our topic for today. Recently we made a little poll with you guys on what the next production will be about. We wanted to keep it Platinum Games themed since it would be a fun change of pace until our next JRPG review. After seeing the results, it seems like many wanted a Metal Gear Rising review, so here we are. Now this is a pretty interesting game for various reasons. As mentioned before, this is a perfect example of a new team having to work for a franchise entry and the outcome being more than positive. Why is that, you ask? Well, there's only one way to be sure of that, and this is our review on Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance.
Subscribe to Kirakaya.
Let's begin by laying the groundwork. Meet Hideo Kojima, creator of the Metal Gear franchise. He's been around since the series beginning back in 1987 all the way to MGS5 back in 2015, and directed almost every entry in the franchise, though it was around 2008 to 2009 where some internal changes were made. You see, after the release of Metal Gear Solid 4, Kojima wanted to take a small break not exactly from the franchise, but larger console releases. So he started working on a new entry that was eventually known as Peace Walker for the PSP. This decision did raise a small issue. Kojima Productions, the main studio who developed most of the Metal Gear titles, wasn't assigned to help Kojima, rather to work on a brand new project. To give a little context, one of the characters introduced in Metal Gear 2, Sons of Liberty, named Raiden Shogun, just Raiden, he didn't have the best first impression. Many fans criticized him for replacing Snake as the lead protagonist and not being as interesting. Kojima was actually quite aware of the fan reception of the character and ultimately decided to change up Raiden's design. Meet Jack the Ripper. He's a cyborg ninja with amazing swordplay and able to kill enemies easily. This new form of Raiden made fans ecstatic. He became a lot more appealing to fans, really showed off what he's capable of, and even gave us some good commentary about a world where human bodies could be weaponized for war. These new changes for Raiden gave a lot more potential to the character that Kojima wanted to expand on the ideas he brought for him, but onto a new title. Hence, that's when Metal Gear Solid Rising was teased in 2009. But sadly, since he was busy with Peace Walker and didn't want to assign a new director for the project himself, he just told his team at Kojima Productions the general idea of the project and edited it off with, "Do whatever you want." Keep in mind that these are the same people who've been working with him for decades up until now, so I can understand Kojima's intentions here. However, this is where the project kind of goes through its developmental problems. Well, don't get me wrong, being able to freely write out a story for a famous IP is something to be very proud of. It's always important to have a few directors to keep everyone in check. Heck, even the developers stated they didn't really know much on where to go. They were able to make a small teaser showing off their enhanced cutting mechanics as a major selling point. But even then they didn't have a story, any levels, bosses, or much to go off from. The team stayed like this for a while until Kojima decided to check in a few months later on the project, which is fair to say he wasn't pleased. On top of that, he couldn't really give much input due to still having work on Peace Walker's DLC and the Metal Gear Solid HD collection around this time. It was by this time that Metal Gear Solid Rising was to the point of potentially being cancelled. The only logical solution they had now was to contact an outside source to finish up the project and be able to cover its costs. With options, time, and money running out, Kojima finally decided to make the decision and pitched Rising to Platinum CEO Tetsuya Minami. They brought all the work that they had done, all the concept art, assets, and ideas to them and asked if they'd be interested to finish it. While Platinum was pretty busy themselves around this time with upcoming releases, they saw the idea of working on a Metal Gear title as an opportunity too good to give up. This led to the final stages of its development, where it was now going pretty smoothly. Sure, Platinum had to cut and redo most, if not all, the work themselves due to switching to one of their in-house engines, but other than that, and a slight bit of pressure from Kojima, Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance released on February 19th of 2013 for the Xbox 360, PS3, and a Steam port later that year. It's honestly quite a miracle that not only Platinum accepted the offer, but also got something done. This is a really good example of how chaotic game development usually can be sometimes. But anyway, now that we got the development part done, let's give a small recap on its story. First off, what I'm about to say is quite controversial. Basically, as I mentioned earlier, I never played a true Metal Gear title. I only saw gameplay and tons of opinions on each mainline entry. But I have to say, MGR has one of my favorite stories in the franchise, only tied with Sons of Liberty. As a brief summary, Rising takes place in the year of 2018, 4 years after the events of Guns of the Patriots. Raiden is now a member of the PMC Maverick Security, a private military agency dedicated to saving and protecting lives. As Raiden and a few of the other members were helping an African nation recover after a recent war, they were attacked by members Sundowner and Jetstream Sam, members of a terrorist under the name Desperado. These two explain that their main goal is to start a war since the fall of the SOP, back in MGS4, has caused many countries to stay in peace and essentially is killing their business. For that reason, they kidnap and even kill the nation's prime minister in front of Raiden. It is then up to Raiden to take down each member of the group, during which he realizes the plans they have prepared: start a worldwide war and weaponize children with robotic parts only for their own profit. This only motivates Raiden to further go up against the members of Desperado. However, as we were about to approach Monsoon, Sam starts to question our role and morals in our actions. He does this by noticing how all this time we've been killing innocent people who are only doing their job. This gets into Raiden's head, but ultimately just activates the form he's best known for, Jack the Ripper. We get into a duel with Monsoon and defeat him, move along and defeat Sundowner 2, and we are told we only have 3 hours before their big plans are going into action. Essentially, Stephen Armstrong, the one behind the whole operation, wants to assassinate the US president in the middle of making peace with Pakistan, all to create a new war on terror. However, all that stops thanks to us being able to travel fast enough, and we meet up with Armstrong and kill him. Phew, where do I even begin? I know this isn't the most complex story in the Metal Gear franchise, a series known to have insanely intricate and deep narratives, but I absolutely love this entry's plot. It's hard to explain, especially when I never talked about Metal Gear before on our productions, but the idea of Raiden, a cyborg ninja basically going up against a terrorist group whose goal is to create a war for profit, is an amazing setup. Raiden, compared to previous entries he'd appeared in, is now a professional. He doesn't go through a simple arc about understanding who he is or his purpose, because he already knows who he is. Sure, at the end of MGS4, he became a human again to live with his family, but keep in mind, major spoil alert, Solid Snake dies by the end of Guns of the Patriots. Theoretically speaking, seeing Raiden 4 years later back in the business shows that no matter what, there's always got to be someone out there to stop any ethically wrong people. And this story really hammers that home. A lot of the character moments here seem basic and too simple at first glance, but it's simple enough to make you think on its narrative themes. Speaking of characters, I absolutely adore them. Sam is probably one of my favorite characters in the game. Not only do I adore the one-liners he gives, like this one,
"I'll take this dance,"
but he also has a pretty interesting build-up as to who he was in his DLC campaign. To put it simply, Sam was also trying to go up against Armstrong, but when he realized he wasn't strong enough to beat him, he changed sides and started working for Desperado. Honestly, this just made that scene where you kill him a lot more painful. Like he said, everyone working for Armstrong are all people who do it to live. Kill or be killed, as Sundowner puts it. Sure, we don't get a ton of character development like MGS 1, 2, or 3, but there are small little things like nods to Raiden's past and him realizing about his morals and goals. And let's not forget Armstrong as a character. He is a massive fan favorite, and for good reason. He's hilarious to watch, his motivation really brings up a lot of discussion for how we operate as a society, and overall, he's just a great character. It's hard to hate him, yet you feel great after defeating him. The amount of detail to the story and topics relevant in today's world says a lot about how well this game has aged. The only real issue is that we aren't answered? The only real issue is that it raises a couple of new questions. How did Raiden meet the Maverick organization? How is his wife feeling about Raiden's job? Heck, we still don't have a clear understanding of how the Patriots got Raiden and turned him into this thing. As much as it would be nice to expand on these ideas, Platinum definitely made a smarter choice on when the plot takes place. To reiterate, while Metal Gear Rising is not a masterpiece by any means, it is a prime example of less is more. The story is simple enough for anyone to understand it, yet the character interactions and themes take the show for active discussion on our world.
The Raiden I know is a hero.
This is where MGR really shines. As I stated in my Ruby Grimm Eclipse review, I mentioned that I've become in love with the hack and slash genre, and even briefly mentioned it on that production. And as you could already guess, MGR plays like one. The controls are very straightforward. You're able to do both a light and heavy attack and combine them to do various combos. A new inclusion to this title is the Ninja Run. Not only does this make Raiden move faster, you can also jump obstacles automatically, deflect bullets, and change your light and heavy slashes to a dash attack and slide respectively. Where the game really shows its innovations are in its cutting mechanics. You see, while you can just slice through the enemies until they pass out with your normal attacks, it won't work in the long run, especially with bosses. To kill them more efficiently and quickly, once you see everything on screen much slower like you see here, you're able to activate Blade Mode. What this does is allow you to make a powerful enough cut that can slice through enemy limbs. Fun fact, you can even rotate the slice of the blade in any direction you want, allowing for small moments in the game where you must cut more precisely. You can kill almost every enemy in the game using Blade Mode, and even some bosses as finishing moves. Not only that, all enemies have different defenses. So say you're fighting one of these enemies wielding a sword. If you get, say, one of their arms glow blue, it can mean that you can cut that specific part with Blade Mode. More often than not, it won't kill them, but you can make them weaker this way. But if you want to slice the entire enemy at once, just keep attacking them until their full body is in the color. When it comes to defense, that's where the game mixes it up a bit. While you're able to dodge, you need to purchase it, and it's a bit difficult to perform. The main way you'll be playing defensively is with a little technique called parrying. Basically, if you press the light attack button as you have the stick pushed to the direction that you are facing the enemy, you can block the attack. You can do a counterattack, which can be very reliable to finish some enemies. Many criticize this mechanic at the start, but believe me, by the end of the game, parrying becomes second nature to do as well. One of the last things to mention is Ripper Mode, which is like an overpowered version of Raiden that can shred through enemies. You unlock this before fighting Monsoon and are able to use it in the chapters afterwards. As for the gameplay as a whole, I need to know how much testing had to be made for all this to work properly. The cutting mechanic just feels really ahead of its time. Having to fight a giant boss like a Metal Gear Ray to then slice off its defenses while chasing it down with very stylish combos is so much fun and satisfying. The fact that this game came out in 2013 and on soon-to-be last-gen consoles at its time says a lot how well Platinum understood the hardware. The graphics just also look so ambitious, and the art style, while pretty unsaturated, it still looks really good. Top that with the huge amounts of explosions, enemies on screen, and the over-the-top action, it's so hard to believe that this game is running at 60 FPS on all systems. Unless you have RTX on, in which it runs at 10,000 frames per second and blows up the whole world with the heat generated. Probably. And last but not least, we can't forget the bosses. This, along with the cutting mechanic, is one of MGR's biggest strengths. Each boss has a new and unique challenge that tests your skills with the game's mechanics and how much you've improved in the game. We have Monsoon, who really tests you on your parrying, Sundowner, who makes you learn how to be more precise with your cutting, and Armstrong is the ultimate endurance test. Given this and the outstanding soundtrack and song of each boss, no wonder this is what fans remember best from Revengeance. The reception for this game was outstandingly high from what I saw. Despite a few Metal Gear fans commenting on how it doesn't play like a traditional entry or that the story was too simple, many critics and Platinum fans really enjoyed the final product. As for sales, it did pretty alright. As of April 11th, 2018, the game reportedly got 1.2 million copies between the PS3 and Steam versions. This was past the expectations of Konami and Kojima, even to the point that they considered making a sequel. But sadly, Platinum didn't seem interested at the time, and also because of other reasons. It's sad to say that the chances of a potential sequel are quite slim, but let's just be grateful that we do have the game that came from all this. But let's end on a bit more of a positive note. Do I recommend Metal Gear Rising? Absolutely. You could easily pick up the Steam port for dirt cheap on sale, but even then I'd recommend it at its normal price too. It may be a short game with not the deepest story, but that doesn't stop it from being the fun and unique entry in the Metal Gear franchise that it is. Now, if you excuse me, I'll be upgrading my Raiden that many compare to the one in MGR. This is Akari from MintJoy Pictures.